Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Delighted to have Rob, Sherri, Maritza, and Joya back. And we have a guest today, Rupali, who's going to be talking today about art in education. So so today's chapter in Romantic Manifesto by Ayn Rand is going to be art and moral treason. But we're going to start off with Rupali talking about art and education. So Rupali, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. I'm excited to be here. And the thing is, this particular chapter is very dear to me as a parent, as an individual, and as an educator. So Ayn Rand starts off the chapter by giving us, she paints a picture of Mr. X. And the first time I read this book, many, many years ago, I thought this was a fictional character. But over the years, I have met Mr. X many times in my life. And it is absolutely shocking to see hopelessness, to see anxiety, to see fear in adults, and the inability to move forward and to be gripped by that fear, right? So Ayn Rand asks us, well, what is the solution in for such anxiety or hopelessness? And she says the solution is reason, to think. And humans have this ability to think, but are we really teaching children? Are we really educating them to become thinkers as they become adults? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. She says that it is the man's capacity to think that then shapes who they become. And I feel as an educator, it's better to catch them young. When they are young, you can teach them the steps to be able to think. Now, when you wait for them to become adults, it is rather late and they have to unlearn or relearn some of those methods. Now, thinking is a very deliberate action. It is something that doesn't come just naturally. It's not like, when children are growing, there are some things that are just going to happen automatically. For example, they're going to get teeth and they're going to be able to crawl and they're going to be able to walk. But then the development of the brain has to happen very thoughtfully. Usually parents, when they look at a little child, the first instinct is to provide safety and nutrition, comfort. And those are the things that come to parents very naturally. But then the brain is developing at the fastest rate at that time. So how do we capture that capacity at a young age? Now, I've noticed, I run a school in Worcester, and what I've noticed is that children in kindergarten across the world, they are really excited. They'll see a butterfly and they're very excited. They see the smallest spider or an ant and they all stoop down and they're looking at it with much curiosity. They are always babbling and chattering and they're thinking and they're talking and they are excited about whatever they see. By the time they come to third grade, you see in traditional schools, that curiosity is beaten out of them. What happens between kindergarten to third grade? Why does that curiosity die? It's because, as Ayn Rand says in this chapter, what the adults are telling the children. They are projecting their bias. They're projecting their negative view of the world on the children. They're projecting their insecurities. And instead of saying, look, here's what's possible, it's their inability to achieve certain goals that they project on the children. I remember very clearly we were doing Shakespeare in third grade for our students, and they were all excited about Much Ado About Nothing. And one of the teachers came to me and she said, we can't teach this. And I was shocked. I said, why can't we teach this? They're having so much fun. They're drawing pictures. They're, able to understand the characters. And she said, well, I don't understand it. How can a third grader understand this? And so, the time that Ayn Rand wrote this book, the education system was such that it was very prescriptive and it taught children what to do. Now, those are the adults who are teaching our children now. So it just occurred to me that, yes, these teachers have not been taught how to think. So how can they teach children how to think? It's really important to have the habit of thinking. As one of the earlier meetups we've done was the habit of thought. So that's important. Well, now for children not to be able to think, who is responsible? And it is the educators, it is the parents, it's the leaders of all the institutions who claim to say we know how to educate children. Now, Ayn Rand talks about, how children are expected to follow rules, wash your hands, sit properly, do not talk. They are just told what to do. So then she asks in this chapter, if that's what we are telling the children, if that's what the education is, and if you're not treating them as an individual, how will they realize their potential? How can the child develop their own sense of life? And how can a child identify values to guide him through life if they're just being told what to do and not to be able to think? So she says that it's the job of the romantic art that helps children. Children who are told not that they cannot. You wait till you grow up. She uses that phrase. Well, what the romantic art does is it provides meaning to the children. And she talks about how children learn in two ways. She talks about the cognitive way and the normative way. And I'm going to share some pictures here to kind of bring the cognitive and the normative ideas together in form of art. So let me just share my screen. So this is a painting called Young Engineer, a Young Builder. It's by Brian Larson, and he paints in the romantic realistic style. Here you can see that there is this child who is placing the last possible piece on her tower. As children, probably all of us have built something like this, whether it's building forts or building blocks, building towers. We see this over and over across cultures, across generations, that children love to build. Now, there she is building. The artist has captured the moment, the slice of time where she is putting that last piece. A lot has happened before this. Many a times this tower has fallen down and she's picked them up again. She's organized them according to colors. She's organized them according to shape. She's organized them according to size. She's built smaller structures, then built larger and larger. And here is the ambitious part where she's building something even taller than her. And while she is doing this, what are the cognitive things she's learning? She's learning the mathematical elements of proportion, size, numbers, counting. She is learning language, big, small, comparisons, wide, narrow, tall, ascending order, descending order. She is learning to form her ideas about what makes a structure stable. So in that moment of building, she is learning many skills that are laying the foundation for science, for engineering, for mathematical thinking, for language, for art. And then if you look at the back, behind her are these tall skyscrapers. And the artist is telling us that what she's doing now is laying foundation for something that's going to come later. that she could be an architect, she could be an engineer, she could be a scientist, she could be an artist, she could be a graphic designer, whatever she chooses to be, there is potential for her to grow. There are possibilities for her to grow into. So that's the cognitive part that um, Ayn Rand talks about, that, by giving children art that can show them the possibilities, they start developing their cognitive sense. She's also talking about the normative. Now, normative has to do more with imagination. So this is another painting by the same artist, Brian Larson, and these two paintings are in the lobby of our school. And so every day when the children come and they see these paintings, so what this painting does is it's capturing her imagination. There you see this child. She's standing all poised to take off. She is completely enamored by the rocket that's taken off. And yes, she cannot read, she cannot do her math, she cannot do the science that's required to be in that rocket ship and be the one driving it, but she has the imagination to soar. You can see clearly she's created her own rocket with duct tape and plastic bottles. She's got the solo cups on her wagon, there's aluminum foil, and there's nothing really stopping her from imagining taking that flight. So what this does, by allowing children to build, to create, to be themselves, it allows them to develop confidence, their self-esteem. It doesn't come by just saying, oh, you're the best person. Oh, you are so good. Oh, you have the power to do everything. The words don't mean anything if the children cannot take action. Right from their childhood, it's important to give them opportunities to build, to think, to create, to solve problems and imagine the solutions. Now, both these paintings show what childhood ought to be, right? This is, this child is not a mess. She is organized. Someone is taking care of her. She is taking care of herself. She's very much at peace. There's no chaos around her. Everything is structured. So what romantic art does, it provides this image of what can it be, what it ought to be. And this picture, the unknown awaits. This picture shows, how a child can imagine and what a child can do. So then Ayn Rand talks about, if the adults are doing all the anti-rational things while educating the child, what is a model for the children? What should the adults do? And here in this picture, you see the role of the adult. The adult is supporting this child's vision. The adult is sitting alongside to let her explore, to let her create, to let her make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes. The adult is not doing it for the child. And the role of the adult, the role of the educator, the role of the parent is to support, to give them the tools to look at life through their eyes. I know when my son was younger, life just slowed down for us. And when he would see something, I would get down to his level to see what he saw. And it is fascinating, when we just stop and we slow down and listen and watch what the children are doing. It's amazing how children think. Also, I notice, many adults, they are always in a rush. They have the next thing to go to, and they're constantly rushing the children. And I often say to the parents, what's the rush? You'll get there, they'll get there. But by allowing time, it helps children develop their sense of life. They can see what's going on. And in one of the earlier chapters, when we were talking about sense of life, I remember Sherri and Rob saying how at a very young age, children develop this sense of life. So I'll leave with what romantic art does for children and adults alike is that it provides an allegory for what things could be. So whether you do poems, whether you do literature, painting, sculpture, whatever you music expose children to, it's laying the foundations for what life could be and what children can aspire to do, what their heroes are, how they can admire them. So I'll leave at this point and we'll carry on forward later.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rupali. That was wonderful. And Rupali will be continuing this at the end of, after all the other presentations about how she's applying this in her school. Next up is Rob. Rob, go ahead.
I'm unmuted. Good. Actually, when I wanted to follow up on something that Rupali was talking about there, that one of the main revelations I had when my kids were really, really young is the realization that children don't have short attention spans. It's the adults who have short attention spans. And I think that specifically, if you're not being reflective about it, it's the adults who have a short attention span for the things about which the children have a long attention span. Right? So the kids are fascinated with something and looking into great detail. And you're like, okay, that it's a flower. So what? It's a bug. So what? You as the adult don't have the attention span just to look at this thing for 5 minutes or for 40 minutes, but the kid does. And part of the one of the things we really tried to do was not get in the way of that and make sure that if the kid wants to spend 45 minutes looking at something, you let him dig into it and have that long attention span. Now, what I want to talk about mostly, though, is I think it was Maritza last week pointed me to an audio of this, and it's basically this exact chapter done as a speech, but it was done under the title Art and Education. But what I found interesting when I listened to the audio is it's clear that it seems like the actual topic she was given was ethics in education. And so she has a little intro talking about, indicating that what she's really addressing is ethics in education. And I thought that provides an interesting way of looking at this chapter, because it's really about how do you teach ethics. And she had mentioned several times earlier in the book about how art is the indispensable medium for the transmission of a moral ideal. And this is where she's really spelling out what she means by that. But the interesting thing is when you read it earlier, it's like art is a means for transmitting a moral ideal. It might sound like art is didactic, that it's there to teach you, it's there to lecture you. And here's how she's spelling out what she means. And it's actually her program against didacticism in art. Describe what that means. Now, when I talk about didacticism, and this is something that I've been writing about this a little bit because I think this is very strong today, right now, that it's a major trend in art. There's a lot of stuff that is promoted out there in the culture, not because it's really great art, but because it has the right message. And that's always the case for art devoted to kids, that you have the adults pushing this because, oh, we like the message of this. But it's also become something among adults. So some people might remember, Sherri and I wrote an article a couple years ago about this, that there was a stir being made because they put this fearless girl sculpture on Wall Street, right? So there's Arthur Demodica's charging bull representing the vitality of Wall Street, and then this girl standing up against it. And the interesting thing about it, though, was that people went nuts about it. They were very excited about it. But if you actually looked at the sculpture itself, it was actually like an off-the-shelf piece of sort of mid-grade garden sculpture that was then put in there and given this meaning by being put there. But the work of art itself wasn't really designed around that, didn't have, people were reading into it the message that they liked. They weren't pulling that out of the work of art itself. And that was sort of an example of this trend of this sort of liking art because it has the right social message, rather than because it really conveys something in and of itself. Now, Ayn Rand's approach to art is very different from that. Now, she talks about how the real heart of this chapter, in my view, is where she talks about how conventional morality is not concerned with the formation of a child's character. It doesn't show him what kind of man he ought to be and why. It is concerned only with imposing a set of rules upon him, concrete, arbitrary, contradictory, and more often than not, incomprehensible rules, which are mainly prohibitions and duties. She goes on to a long set of examples of these. So the idea of ethics as rules and prescriptions and lecturing. And what she's putting forth here is the view of art, of moral education as working not through prescriptions and rules and lecturing, but through inspiration and through art that makes you motivated to be or do something. And she gets to that in the next, well, just a couple paragraphs later, she says, it is not abstract principles that a child learns from romantic art, but the precondition and the incentive for the later understanding, the emotional experience of admiration for man's highest potential, the experience of looking up to a hero, a view of life motivated and dominated by values, a life in which man's choices are practicable, effective, and crucially important. And then she sums that up as being, so what you're getting is not a lecture, you're not getting prescriptions, you're getting a vision of what life can be, and the sense of, I want to be that, I want to do that, I want to live this way, I want to see the world this way. And that she describes that as, she says that this is what she calls a moral sense of life. So you notice in this whole book, we're building up these concepts, right? We have a sense of life, we have a psychoepistemological sense of life, we have all these different concepts relating to this. Now she brings us to a new one, which is a new breakdown of sense of life, which is a moral sense of life. And a moral sense of life is this sense of being inspired by the example shown to you by a great work of art. And it's not working through commandments, but working through inspiration. And then now the main focus that she begins with here, though, in the part where the moral treason comes in, is the damage of saying to someone when they view, art that is inspiring, of saying to a child, life is not like that, or instilling the idea that this is unrealistic and that life is not like that. And we had a discussion last week, I think, where somebody was saying, well, the problem with heroic art is that all heroes are flawed. And we could certainly come up with many examples of heroes who are flawed, but I think the issue that we've been talking about, or another issue we've been talking about all throughout this book, is the idea of selection and emphasis. And I view the issue of heroes and flaws as also one of selection and emphasis. So there's a different emphasis if you say people can do great things, but they're flawed, versus people have flaws, but they can do great things. And the kind of art she's talking about is the one that does the second thing, the one that focuses on the human potential, the fact that people can do great things, and that's the really important message to take across. And whatever flaws people might have are either left out or de-emphasized in the art. And the focus is on, here are the great things that people can do, the courageous things they can do, the amazing things they can create, etc. And that is what gives that's the sort of affirmation you need that makes morality seem real and possible, and sort of gives a green light to a child in the pursuit of values. And that's why, but I think that gives you an idea of how she has this view of art as conveying morality, but not through a didactic way, where it's telling you what to think and giving you prescriptions and rules. But art is conveying morality in an inspirational way, where it's showing you a vision that you then want to achieve and that you believe is possible to achieve.
Excellent. And I think that ties beautifully to the pictures that Rupali presented, because that's exactly what those pictures are doing. It's not kind of showing you the details or telling you that this is what you need, but saying this is what is possible. Look and get inspired by it. Wonderful. Next up is going to be Maritza, Joya, and Sherri. Maritza.
Well, I actually was going to read that same exact quote that Rob just gave you, so I won't do that now. I will say, so I would be the first panelist today speaking to you who is not a parent. But you know what? I want to tell anyone else here who is not a parent that does not absolve you from the role you play in the future of our children, because one does not need to be a parent in order to be that moral, or that vision of a moral person or ideal that a child can look up to. And I think that in society, we spend too much time knocking people who aren't parents, like, oh, you have nothing to say because you're not ever been a parent. I don't think that's true. I think inspiration can be found from all sources. And just as it's dangerous to tell a child, oh, that's not real, heroes, people aren't like that, it's also dangerous to shut down somebody who would potentially be an inspiration to your child. And it's Ayn Rand is telling us that it is more, moral treason would be to. So she has a quote where she says, romantic art is the fuel and the spark plug of a man's soul. So let's take out man, let's put, and the spark plug of a human's soul, right? And so its task is to set a soul on fire and never let it go out. That is so important for children, I think, and that is the role of every person. Little children, there's always the jokes of how they're asking the question, why? I have about 1,000,004 nieces and nephews, and I will tell you that I have never said to any one of them when they ask me why, because. That drives me absolutely crazy when adults say that. I think it's so lazy. Yes, it can get annoying, but you know what? If you answer 10 whys in a row, you know what happens? Is that they go back, and when they come back with questions, they may only have 2, but they're better. And their little face lights up when they see you, because now they know that you answer their question. I mean, it's so simple a thing that you don't even necessarily need to go out of your way. If you treat a child like an intelligent, rational being, just as you do your fellow friend or brother or husband, or, if you treat them in that same manner, you are enabling them to have something to look up to. And I really find that that's often lost. And so I really think that what everyone here is saying is so vital. And even if you're not a parent, it does apply to you. It really does. Ayn Rand is telling us that, we're providing this image to children, and without it, our entire future is lost. And that's huge. And it doesn't matter if you're the one, procreating, you're still, like nothing happens in a bubble. We are all connected in some way or form. And as such, we have to assume that any interaction with any child is a potential life-altering experience for them. Thanks.
Wonderful, Maritza. I could not agree more with you. I mean, I have a niece, and she, got the idea very quickly that, she can ask any question. So even when she moved away, I would just get calls at random times, no hello, to say, why is it? So it's like I pick up the phone and it says, why, how is it that these big pictures on the TV come through that little line?
That's me all the time.
Yeah. So anyway, wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Joya.
Thank you. This is wonderful. So I wanted to connect this chapter and what we're talking about to Ayn Rand's own biography, because she had in her own life a very important occurrence of a story that she read and experienced when she was a child that had this incredible effect on her. And I actually pulled out of the Ayn Rand archives this piece from a series of biographical interviews she gave in, I think it was the early 60s. And I cannot say this any better than she can. So I just want to read to you what it was. I mean, this was her speaking. So this is Ayn Rand in her own words about this story, the mysterious valley, and this hero, Cyrus, that inspired her for the rest of her life. The real love affair, but I mean this seriously in every sense of the word, was the next year. And that was when I was 9. It was 1914. It was the same summer that we went to Switzerland. So that 1914 was a bit of a turning point in my life anyway. And this was a different magazine. By that time, Mother subscribed to another one, Seeing My Taste. You see, she was always considerate in this sense. She subscribed for me to a boys' magazine because of the adventure stories. And I started reading this story, and really it was a love affair almost from the first installment. The whole atmosphere was magnificent. And very briefly, it was the story of some English officers in India. And it starts with the fact that a tiger had just killed another officer. And they established an exposition that there had been strange occurrences of these tigers killing too many men. And they were all men who were heroes and expert shots and all that. And nobody could understand in this English post, why are they all disappearing? Now, they were assuming they were killed by these tigers, but nobody ever found a body. And the story starts when they are mourning their best man, who has just been carried away by a tiger or killed. But mind you, there was no body. And he was described as how independent he was and how strong, and he could do anything, and no tiger could ever defeat him. He was planted very much as the hero, and now he's killed. And that was the first installment. And I remember asking my governess, is it possible that these are trained tigers and that those men are not killed? Maybe they're just kidnapped? And she very earnestly told me that that's perfectly preposterous. Tigers can't be trained. Well, sure enough, I had guessed right. You see, there's 2 of the officers who start out in pursuit of these tigers to avenge all their friends, and then followed extremely exciting adventures. And they find it was called the Mysterious Valley. And they find this valley, which is ruled by a monstrous sort of old Raja who was a very unromantic villain, a plain villain, who hates the English rule, you see, and is plotting to avenge India or overthrow the British. Now, the whole spirit of the story was very much Rudyard Kipling. That was the sense of life. And so these 2 go out in the pursuit of the hero. Oh, sorry, I got to flip here. Imprisoned, and all the others who had disappeared. And the Raja was going to kill them all by slow torture. But this hero, and his name was Cyrus. You see, that kind of feeling I have for him, it still exists. And it's in essence everything I've ever felt for Rourke, Galt, Nathan, Frank, or all my values. There's nothing I can add in quality to any serious love later on that wasn't contained in that, except being first. And the intensity was almost something unbearable. It was like I was a woman in love in a serious sense, but in a metaphysical sense. The whole reality around me lost all meaning. If before I felt that I'm imprisoned among dull people and I have bad luck, now it was almost metaphysical. It was literally, they don't know, but I do. This is what's possible. So I can't put that any better than she does. That is what I wanted to share.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Joya. That was great. All right. So now it's Sherri's turn. And Sherri, you have a surprise for us.
Yes. It's going to take a couple of minutes here if we switch from one Zoom to another. And make sure we've got our mics, but I thought this was the perfect time to capitalize on all the parts we've learned in all these chapters up to now, that it would be a great time, especially with this particular chapter, to take you into our house and show you my favorite piece of sculpture and go over it in detail like we would do with our kids, or maybe this is a way by way of example, kind of how I would recommend introducing yourselves to a piece of art for the first time, and how I've been saying for many years, for all these chapters, from A to Z, and without skipping, well, we're going to have to skip a few steps because I don't have an hour and a half, but we're going to get as many of those letters from A to Z as we can get. And so I'm going to introduce you to a piece of sculpture. So,
let me just, let's get the technology right. So what I would recommend now is to mute this mic and mute the mic that you have.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
All right. Can you hear me, Shrikant? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. So Rob, you're muted on that end? All right. So everyone, this is a work of sculpture that I have the great pleasure of possessing. We bought it in 2006. Something like that. It was originally first made in 1994. And I know you can see the title of the sculpture and the artist down here in the name area, but really I want you to focus on the details first. So because we're not in person, I need to explain a couple things. This is a bronze sculpture. It weighs about 70 pounds. I can technically lift it. I leave that job to Rob. It is 22 inches high. So Rob's head is about half, maybe 2/3. Yeah, so this is much bigger than life size. I have the ability here to bring you all around. There'll be a little bit of bouncing every now and then. I'll try desperately not to create any motion sickness for anyone.
Here, let me just do something for scale.
Oh, okay, Rob's gonna, you're
Can you
not
see
in
that?
the, yeah, so there's
For
an
scale.
example for scale. It's much bigger than life size. So when I come to a work of art for the first time, I ignore that little plaque that's off on the side and I just look. And I'm looking at little details. And so I'm gonna take you guys not all the way around because again, he's 70 pounds, it was hard to move. We have him in a safe spot. But I'm gonna take you around and I'm gonna point out some of the details that I see. And then we're gonna go through a couple of different layers of going from the perceptual details to what does the work of art mean. So in your own mind, if you're looking at this, you can make your own notes if you want and write what is most noticeable to you. But I'll show you what's most noticeable to me. So, and occasionally we're going to get a few details or you'll get a little bouncy. So the first thing I notice, I can't help but notice, is how muscular this man is. You can see by the shoulders. This particular position here shows that you're getting a weird distortion. The shoulders are actually a little bit wider, but the way the camera presents this, it looks a little narrower. So I'll try to find a little better spot for that. But it's a very muscular body. It's a man in quite his prime. He's got quite a full beard, quite a full head of kind of tousled, messed up hair, windswept maybe, something like that. You can see the musculature when you get in here, especially around the neck muscles and the trapezius muscles. But when you look at his face, let me get this angle just right for you. When you look at his face, you have these little creases around his eyes. Maybe you need to go in a little closer for you on that. No, I don't need a pointer. You have these little creases around his eyes. Oh, this is the sort of thing that happens. These aren't creases like wrinkles because you're old. These are the creases you get when you're smiling, but not a really big, like goofy grin smile. These are kind of that slight smile. And you can also see in the muscles just above the mustache, You can see the muscles engaged in his face, and you can see just the little corners, if the light's right, the little corner of his mouth curling up. You can also see these eyes that are piercing and looking very specifically at something. You can tell from where we're looking, he's looking down a little and off to the side. In the view, if you're looking at the same direction I'm looking at, it's a little off to my left as the viewer. So there is definitely something he's focused on. There is an intelligence in those eyes. There is some humor there. And there's a calmness. The body is not, this isn't an inaction motion. This, you can see the shoulders are musculature, but they're at rest at the moment. The other thing that I always noticed was there's this little bump. I noticed this because my nose was broken when I fell on the ice as a little kid. So I always notice when other people's noses are broken. So the nose is not totally straight, and there's this little lump on the nose. Doesn't really make him look disfigured. It kind of makes him look more rugged. But it's there. There's a notice. There's a detail there. Let me bring you around the side a little bit over here too. So when I take a child through an art gallery and we're looking at a piece of sculpture, I try to bring them to this attention first. Just look at all the details. What are all the things you notice? All of the details in the beard, there's all these little pieces, kind of messed up, but not slovenly. Do you know what I mean? But I'm struck over and over again by this little smile that's creasing up in the corners of his mouth. I can't get away from that. So then I like to take a second layer. Remember what we've been talking about in all of these lectures about how Ayn Rand talks about the artist's sense of life, that the artist is putting in what's important to that artist, that those choices are not only the key to what the art means, but also what the artist feels as most important. It's getting you to the understanding of the work of art. So let's go back over those details again and think about them in a different way. So I'm not sure if I'm going to get them in the same order, but let's start with that very muscular body. What would it mean now that we know it's Michelangelo? What would it mean if this body didn't have this powerful muscle structure? And for those of you who don't know, Michelangelo was a painter, he was a sculptor, and he was an architect. So he had this broad range of skills, but he did some bronzes, but mostly he was known as a sculptor in stone. And if any of you have ever tried to break, say, a brick with a chisel, you get a tiny, tiny amount of what it's like to actually power through a block of marble, which takes a lot of physical strength. So, what?
He was known for being fast at it.
Yeah, and he was known, Michelangelo was known for being shockingly fast at through a block of marble as if it were clay. Everybody talks about that. From his contemporaries, we're always talking about that. So you have this subject, Michelangelo. We see this musculature that allowed him to do the work that he was doing. So imagine if this were a sculpture of Michelangelo that was more frail. And you get a sense of what a difference piece that would be. That would be an example of showing Michelangelo maybe in his frail old age, when he could no longer do the thing that he was doing. Now, he pretty much carved to the end of his day. So even in his old age, he was still doing this. But, you know, Matt, you can get a sense of what it would mean if this were shown in a different level of detail of that musculature. Then let's take a look at these eyes and this expression of intelligence behind these eyes. If these were blank eyes, like Michelangelo did a sculpture of Dionysus. If any of you have ever seen it, you can look it up. He did a sculpture of Dionysus, and you can see the eyes are glazed. They're unfocused, and you can just about imagine that Dionysus is just about to go and trip because he's clearly inebriated. This is not that. These are eyes that have a sense of humor, that have a sparkle. So imagine what it would mean if that wasn't there. This is what's important in this piece. And then notice this little smile. You can see it in the wrinkles around the eyes, in the musculature around the cheek muscles, and this little curves up at the corners of his mouth. Imagine if this work of art had a slack face or a frown, or Bernini's sculpture of David, who's about ready to throw the rock and has this, you know, roar on his face. Imagine what a difference that would make. So here we have this sense of calm, but this sense of happiness or pride or something that we're seeing develop in that expression that's just happening there on his face. And then also think about the ruggedness of his face and this full kind of tousled mess of hair. This is a man, clearly, imagine it if it were all slicked back, you know, like the business banker on the way to work with his hair just absolutely perfect. And, you know, that would be a totally different sense. You would get a totally different feeling of what that sculpture meant. The hair all tousled like this is telling you that this is in a moment. This is action has been happening, and there's a pause and a relaxed pause that we're seeing. And then let's take a look again, because this is a detail that the sculptor has put in that's important. This bump on the nose, this dent that you see, this lump there. Michelangelo's the famous story that when he was young, a fellow artist, a fellow sculptor was so jealous of his skill that he literally broke his nose. I mean, badly broke his nose. This is a historical fact that has been written about in so many places. It's not a fictional story. And if you look at other paintings and sculptures, portraits of Michelangelo, there are a couple of that have been done in his lifetime, so they're more likely realistic. Realistic depictions of what he actually looked like. That nose was badly deformed in some of these other portraits. In this portrait, we see that there is a dent, there is a broken nose, but it's not massively distorted. It's not disfiguring of his face. So it's there, it exists, but it isn't the focus. It's a little step back from that. So there's another level of observation. So then we take it another level further and start thinking with this detail, what's shown, what's not shown. What does that mean? And I see this and as a moment, and this is confirmed, the artist has expressed this too. This is a moment when a very powerfully physically active man, Michelangelo, paused in a moment in his work and he sees what he's created. And this is the expression on his face.
Wow.
We see a moment of deep, deep pride in his work. We see both a match of that physical strength. It's equally matched by the intelligence behind these eyes. And we see this break in the nose. It's something that existed. It's something that happened, but it's not the major focus. It's not the ultimate detail that we're showing here. This is a detail that the evil of a man who would break someone's nose because they were talented, that exists out there in the world, but it's not the primary. The hero, the sculptor with the talent, couldn't still continue. He didn't stop him. Then I would take it to another level after that, because that is, we've talked about this throughout our series here about the difference between what the artist is putting into a work, but then there's also what you, the viewer, take from it. So there's always that other element. So I would take this another step and point out as a viewer, and in this particular case, as an owner of the piece, what this means to me. I discovered this work at a conference, was walking down the hallway and was seeing it get installed in a gallery space. They were just lighting it. I stopped so fast, dead in my tracks, that people behind me actually ran into me. I apologized, got myself out of the way, and made it straight to this piece. And spent as many hours in between conference lectures and whatever else was going on, getting to know this piece, and took probably years before I could actually pull the money together to purchase it. But we talk about in some of the other chapters about the value of art, what art does for you. And for me, this piece of art came into my life at a moment when I was constantly being offered positions, jobs, to do just mediocre work for really good pay. Really good pay, lots and lots of mediocre work. And I was struggling against that. I needed the funds at the time, but at the same time, I knew that it was something I couldn't do. I needed to do the thing that I needed to do. I needed to be this proud of the work that I was doing. So this piece has sat in my office or somewhere in my house to daily remind me that this level of pride in your work is that important. Now I'm gonna pop back over. We're gonna shut this one down and go back to the other screen.
There we go. Oh, wait.
Should I leave the meeting? Yes. Okay, that's easier.
All right, going back.
All right, I'm coming back.
Can you hear us, Sarah?
Yep.
Are you muted?
Go ahead.
No, I'm not muted.
You're all set. Go
I
ahead.
can't hear you though.
Can you hear me?
Turn your volume. There we go. Now we're good.
All right. Wow. Sherri, that was just amazing. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Next up is Rupali. Rupali, go ahead.
Sherri, that I have chills right now. My hair is standing. Beautifully said.
And I'm quite a mess.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Well, so what Sherri just talked about was an experience that the viewer has and how it's a reminder of our values on a day-to-day basis. I wanted to share a similar story from our school. And I'm going to share my screen again. There. This painting, so Sherri, I've wanted to have Brian Larson's paintings for a while, but couldn't afford them. And finally, my family gifted this when we opened our school. So very thankful for that. This painting is just at the entrance of our school where the children come down a flight of stairs, and this painting's right there. On the very first day of school, we had a new student in first grade, rambunctious boy, very full of energy. He comes running down the stairs and he just stops dead in front of this painting. And he says, "Wow, look at that. I want to do that. She is amazing." These were his words. And then he went about doing his things. That's what the painting does. That's what art does. It brings an abstract idea into concrete form. And it makes that value, whatever value is important to the viewer, it brings that value in a concrete form for the viewer to take, to be inspired, and then take it from there. So when Ayn Rand talks about education and how we bring romantic art to children, she talks a lot in contrast about, how evil an anti-rational system can be for the children and how it can stifle and kill the spirit in them. That, she says, is the worst thing that we can do to children as adults, right? But then, what is the way to help children develop their sense of life? Maria Montessori is the educator that comes to my mind. I think that the closest pedagogy that reflects what Ayn Rand was trying to say in this book is the Montessori pedagogy. And I want to share what we do at our school. So I started a school about 5 years ago based on the Montessori method. And I want to share with you how we start our school. So our school is based on 6 core values. And when education is based on values and not on prescriptive standards that a child needs to achieve ABC by first grade, second grade, third grade, they're going to get there. Children are driven, they're going to get there. But for them to be moral citizens, moral adults with a strong core, they need to have core values in them. So whenever our teachers teach children, they talk about, what does it mean to be respectful to yourself first, to others, to the environment, to the materials in the classroom, using the scientific and engineering design method, analysis, critical thinking to seek truth, so that they are not just following what everybody else is saying. There is so much noise around us that it's important for children to learn how to separate that noise and really understand the basics. Every teacher at our school pushes for excellence. Every child can do better. And what is that better? It doesn't mean that you're pushing the children, but you're nudging them along and saying, showing them what's good. So our teachers talk about craftsmanship, workmanship, penmanship, sportsmanship. And what do those qualities mean? Another thing they talk about is balance, and that balance is not necessarily a straight line, but more like yin and yang, where there's a little bit of chaos in order and order in chaos. To live a life of honesty with dignity and integrity. So children are going to be bound to have conflicts. How do they resolve those? How are they courageous? And the goal of education is to be joyful. When we had Martin Luther King Day holiday, this kindergarten gets into her car and on the Friday before that, and she said, I just don't want school to be over. I want to stay here. And to me, that's, music to any educator's ears, right? That they want to be there, they want to learn. So giving them that moral compass in education is key. What's missing in most traditional schools is the lack of values. Anything goes. And any opinion is okay. There is no judgment to that. But there are morals. There's good, there's evil, there's truth, there's not truth, there's good and bad. So children have to learn to distinguish these ideas. So the way teachers help students come up with their own values is by, at the beginning of the year, teachers, both on our on-campus and online school, they help students develop their own constitution. So the constitution is developed by the students for the students to use throughout the year. It's a living document. And then they identify values that are important to them. They draft the constitution, they edit it, they write it, they sign it, and they decorate it, and it stays in the classroom as a document to refer to. So here is a child writing a constitution. She was in 4th grade at that time. And clearly, center yourself is a big part of that classroom. This year, it's summon your Zen. So whatever it is, it helps children start to develop their values. Now, if you look at the art that she's done around it, you can see that all the members of the classroom are sitting on a cloud. And they're all in this meditative position. And for her, that was important, that if you are centering yourself, you are in this thoughtful, meditative position, and everyone is thinking. Now, on the right is the class constitution from the kindergarten to grade 3 classroom. And you can see for those children, the younger children, it's very direct, it's very literal. Just be joyful, be safe, be honest, get your work done and clean up, be gentle. But then as they get older, they are able to identify these ideas in values. Be virtuous, center yourself, be humble. Wherever you go, go with all your heart. So they often will pick a quote that means a lot to them. By giving them this right off the bat at the beginning of the year, you pretty much eliminate disciplinary issues in the classroom, because anytime there's a disciplinary issue, you point them to this document, they can go through it, they can think for themselves, and there's not an adult telling them you're doing this correctly or not. You're just guiding them to think. So once you establish a method to work together. We are going to be in this together. And these are the values and the code of conduct that we're going to follow to work together. So then if things fall apart, here's a boy, his drawer had fallen apart and he didn't know what to do. So this girl just goes, brings the screwdriver and helps him fix it. And you can see on their face, they're completely engaged. And Sherri, I'm going to go back to Michelangelo's expression, because when you are pensive, when you are reflective, when you're thinking, you have this sense of satisfaction. That smile is the sense of satisfaction. And here they are, not bothered at all. They're very much at peace. They're not having an explosive reaction or anything. It's a matter of fact, I'm going to do it, I'm going to fix it. On the right, you see the children are building a prototype for some measurement activity that they're going to build. So we do reading, writing, math. I want to be clear that we do teach them the basic core academic skills, reading, writing, math, history, geography, science, because without that knowledge, you really cannot build anything. But I want to show what else you can add in education. Last, here is a kindergarten student who's writing about what they did. And so this is journal entry. Every morning they come in, they write a journal. And here in this picture, you can see this child's sense of life. Vibrant colors, very happy, and the choice of words. One day I saw a rainbow on my car. It was so glorious, right? Just where does this come from? It comes from the romantic literature that the teachers have introduced them. Joya talked about Rudyard Kipling. We often start our year off with Just So Stories by Rudyard Kipling. And the language is so lyrical, the adjectives, the words that Rudyard Kipling uses. And it gives you this greater, that's larger than life image of the characters. And so when children start writing their own work, even from kindergarten onwards, they can start emulating or start using that vocabulary in their own way, and testing it out in a very safe classroom environment. Now, one of the things we had talked about earlier was the role of heroes. This is every year for Mystery History Day on Halloween. Our students dress up in a character from history, and they read biographies and autobiographies. They identify 3 core clues that they want to ask their classmates. So here you see this child is getting ready and is in that character, in that image. And now he is embodying those values. We are all humans. This just helps them understand that humans can do things, right? So whether it is Rob with the Churchill cigar, or it's this character dressing up as a famous person in history, it allows them to identify what were the struggles of this character. How did they overcome those struggles, and how did they achieve what they achieved? Sherri talked about the broken nose. Every human being has to struggle. They go through the struggle, and that does not prohibit them from achieving greater accomplishments. And so it's important to give children the opportunity to be those characters, to walk in those shoes for a bit. Also, bringing them to the day-to-day work. So here is a project that's extremely dear to me. Every December, we do gingerbread castle competition. And as an architect, I absolutely love this work, because the children have to, they work, kindergarten to grade 8 students work in a group. And so we have multiple groups, but because it's that age range, they can work with each other, they can collaborate with each other, they can learn to mentor, they can learn. This is the project where our children learn measurement right off the bat. From kindergarten, they know to count in inches, half inches. By the time they get to third grade, they're doing it in fractions of inches. And if their prototype doesn't stand, they cannot bake their gingerbread pieces. So the children design and make prototypes, they measure and cut. This is the project where they learn measure twice, cut once. And then once their prototype is standing, they roll out, the science teacher will talk to them about the chemistry behind the gingerbread dough. They test different gingerbread recipes to see which one is the right consistency. They roll out the dough, they bake the pieces according to the templates, and then they start building. And there you can see they're focused, they're engaged. It's a meaningful, real project to them. And that's the only time they can have candy at school. So there it is. That's their gingerbread castle. It's a hexagonal castle. There is no castle that exists like this in the world except in their imagination. And by allowing them time, by allowing them to experiment, children can build. In her book, Ayn Rand talks about, what does anti-rational education do to children? And she talks about how it bleeds them, slowly, not in one blow. Now, this is just the opposite. Projects like this, by giving them time and allowing them to experiment, transforms them into children who can think, who can solve problems, who can imagine, who can make things happen. And again, this is much like she says, it does not happen overnight. It takes time and multiple experiences to build this resilience, to build the confidence, to, sometimes children design pie in the sky and, the material just does not lend itself for that particular kind of a shape. And so there are tears and there is frustration, but they learn to live through that. They learn that, hey, this is part of the process. And when they are done, there's this immense sense of satisfaction. There you see the child at the back. She has this quiet smile. The children are looking and thinking about their project. And here is the adult, the role of the adult we talked about, to be there alongside, to guide them. He's not touched the gingerbread castle once. And he's just guiding them, asking them questions. So this is another favorite part of the work that I do at the school. We are partnered with the Art Museum, and it's right across from our school. So all of our art classes are at the museum, and we take our children to the galleries. It's a small museum that children can go to. You see, when Sherri talked about what is the first thing you do, you stop and you look intently at what the art is telling you. And in the past, we've talked about, how do apples, I think in the very first chapter, Ayn Rand talks about an artist who represents an apple, who draws an apple as it should be or ought to be. And there you can see a painting where the children are looking at something that is a composition of fruit and flowers in beautiful, glorious colors. And on the other side, you see this child thinking, and he's probably sketching something that he is seeing in the museum, but he is in deep thought. And the museum offers a very quiet, contemplative place for children. Not all schools have a museum. For example, our online school does not have a museum to go to, but you can bring these experiences to children through prints, through what Sherri has been doing for us. Every week she brings us these art pieces. So you can do the same thing with the children. And when they can then express having this experience of romantic art, they can then express themselves in their own artwork. So this was the year we were studying Europe and we were studying murals. We went to the art museum and actually saw murals on the wall. The children built wooden frames, they designed their own panels and poured the plaster, experimented with different colors, and finally decided on a theme. Again, this was a collaborative project. So children had 3 panels, and they decided they would use the name of the school, TEC, Think, Explore, Create. And each group chose a theme. Now, I have to say, this was not guided by a teacher. We just provided them the space and time. And over a course of 6 weeks, they were able to create this project. But you can see how intently the children are drawing. There's this jovial, happy ambience around them, that they're not on a deadline of any sort. They're just enjoying the process. And then here are the 3 panels that they've created. So it's their imagination. You can again see the lessons that they've learned in science and books. The T stands for think. They've got the books and the apple. There's the observatory to look up at the sky and think about it. In the second panel, they're exploring with the rocket, they're exploring the space. And in the third, there's the space station. So this is something children are naturally interested in, that they want to do. And then every little square is an individualized square that each child then painted. So these are kindergarten to grade 6 students. And you can see, someone is interested. Thinking is about numbers. Thinking is sitting under a tree and reading with a teacher. Thinking is asking questions. Thinking is playing chess. Thinking is looking through the binoculars at things that you see. Exploring is looking at our world. Exploring is looking at animals. Exploring is looking for ants under the tree. There you can see in the third square, a boy is under the tree looking for ants crawling up. There is a microscope to explore. And in Create, they have their own projects that they've created. There is a maze drawn, building their own creations with blocks, looking at the space and the solar system. So children can then express their own ideas of what these words mean to them and what art means to them. This is their expression. So what does romantic art do to children? It inspires them, it tells them, and I was going to actually read the quote that Rob read, so I'm not going to do that again, but it helps children say, that's who I want to be. It inspires them, and it gives them a path to get there through the examples. It gives them a concrete way to see it. And I also wanted to read the last paragraph, which Maritza read, but it is the spark, the fuel that, and the spark plug of a man's soul. It is our task as educators, as parents, as adults. Some of our teachers are not parents, and they do a fantastic job because they just understand that children need this food, this fuel for their soul. We take care of children, we take care of their physical needs, but this is their need for their soul, for their growth. So that's what I wanted to share with everyone. Thank you.
Rupali, that was fantastic. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. I've put a link to the school in the chat. So please go ahead and check out more details about the school. So what we are going to do now is we are going to go directly into the breakout rooms, and we are going to discuss everything that has been presented. And then after we have had time to discuss it, we come back, share our takeaways, and ask questions to the panel. All right, I'm starting the breakout rooms now. All right, everything is set. So folks, it's time for takeaways and questions. So you can talk about your takeaways. You can talk about what did you get from the meetup and the breakout rooms. You can also ask questions. You can either do just takeaways, just questions, or both. And then the panelists will have a chance to respond to each of them as and when you speak. We have 4 rules, as always. Number 1, type exclamation mark if you want to speak or raise your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic. Today's topic is art and morality. What does art do for us? And some amazing things have been said. So I want to focus on that topic. And 3rd rule, be brief. 4th rule, speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. All right. So if you want to speak, just go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Look forward to hearing from as many people as would like to speak. All right. So we'll start with Jonathan. Jonathan, what did you think?
Thank you. I loved all the presentations. I have a question, and that is one thing I can see is that romantic art or art with heroes can inspire you. In reading this essay, the part of it that is not that clear to me, though, is if you don't have that, why do you necessarily end up like Mr. X? Or in a lot of the descriptions throughout this essay, I really have trouble seeing that must necessarily be the case. Like she talks about someone who's gives up the realm of valuing or value choices and judgments. And whenever I read this kind of language, it's something I have trouble seeing. Is that true? Like I get the part about the inspiration from romanticism, but this part about Mr. X is less clear to me. So I'd love to hear comments on that to make that more real for me.
Wonderful. Folks, the panelists, you can just unmute yourself if you want to speak. So it's going to be Maritza followed by Rob and Sherri. Maritza.
I just want to say real quick, I think the presupposition is that you don't find anything else either. Like it's not that just because you didn't find romantic art that, you had zero inspiration, but Mr. X was in a spot where he had no inspiration, nothing to look up to. And I mean, but in general, like he had nothing to look up to. And in addition, when he found something and he saw it, he turned his back on it. Now, it could be that the circumstances in his life led him to not be able to have the courage or the inner strength to hold on to that as inspiration. But what I'm seeing here is that Ayn Rand is shining the spotlight on romantic literature and art as a beacon for us. But she does say it's not the only beacon. It's just from her perspective, she's viewing this is one of the strongest beacons for us. And I mean, if you think of it, a soul without hope is lost, right? So at its very basic, that's what she's telling us. It's not necessarily just that you don't, if you don't find this romantic art, you're doomed. But yes, if you don't find this romantic art, you're doomed. If you don't find something else as your shining light, like without motivation, we as human beings will shrivel. She calls our soul, our consciousness. So you have nothing, then your consciousness is going to keep shriveling up. And Mr. X was like even one step in a more dire case, because not only was he not finding something, his consciousness or his self-awareness was so dim that when he found something, he didn't know how to grab it and hold on to it and nourish it. And that's really scary. We don't, any of us want to find ourselves in that spot. And I think that's what she's pointing out to us.
Next up is going to be Sherri, Rob, and then Rupali. Go ahead.
I have something to say too. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I have nothing to add to what Maritza said,
Yeah.
except that maybe somebody else knows better on this, but the objectivist law I heard was that Mr. X was actually in real life was Alan Greenspan. But that's just something I heard.
Okay.
But go ahead.
All right. So then it's going to be Rupali followed by Joya. Rupali, go ahead.
I think the only thing I'd like to say is in Ayn Rand's style, it's by making that contrast so severe, it really helps understand what can be, because you can see the contrast. I think that style of hers helps put things in perspective. So perhaps it's hard to read it. When I read this chapter, I had to say, okay, this is all the negative. So what is possible? And I had to kind of create that positive message for myself.
Joya?
I just wanted to add that part of this too is even the role of the adults in this child's life, because it's not necessarily that Mr. X didn't have, access to romantic art in some form when he was a child. She talks about perhaps when he was a kid, he loved Buck Rogers. But a big part of the problem was that the adults in his life had this attitude of, you can't take this seriously, real life isn't like that, Buck Rogers never gets a cold and you get colds. And so I think she really is pointing out that there's a role for adults, which is why I think this really is all about education. The way that the adults are the interface between the art and the child. And is the adult encouraging that romantic aspect? Is the adult encouraging looking for heroes and admiring heroes, or just squashing that impulse before the child even has the ability to articulate what that is?
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Brendan, followed by Kevin.
All right, hi. I started asking this question in their breakout group, and then I accidentally kicked myself out somehow. So this is for everybody. First, very interesting, looking at the sculpture, talking about education. This is one of my favorite chapters in the book. So it's great to hear all this additional insight. And my question was more beyond just the introduction of art and heroes and romanticism to children, the development of their knowledge and exposure to that art. I was talking about a essay by the poet Brian Hooker in 1912, talking about how children would be exposed to higher class art and just told that the art that they were reading, like Nick Carter Weekly, was the example he gives, wasn't good. And the children would think, well, you may say Walter Scott's great, but I prefer Nick Carter Weekly, and just reject everything else. And how then, as an educator or as parents, do you help move them up beyond the Star Wars or whatever it is nowadays? Brian Hooker was suggesting to point out all the good things about Nick Carter Weekly, and then how that then applies to this higher tier of all art and helping transition them to it. But I was wondering what everyone's thoughts there were.
I've got a lot of thoughts on that. if it's okay to go first.
Go.
Yeah, because this idea of the highbrow and getting kids into highbrow art and teaching people about that, because I think it's something that's been missing from the culture. And somebody just said, Brendan, please post the essay. Please, yes, I want to know about that, because I'm very interested in that.
It's the Cyrano translator.
Was that?
The guy that translated Cyrano.
Excellent. And I'm doing an experiment in this with my kids, who I'm trying to turn into snobbish highbrow people.
Sure, trying.
But my son goes into what I call old man rants about popular music.
You should tell him about what happened when he saw Lady Gaga at the Super Bowl.
I don't remember exactly.
We were at an airport hotel.
Did he ask us to turn it off?
Well,
anyway.
That's
anyway. I keep telling people, I swear to God, I didn't put him up to this. This is his own thing. So part of it, I think, is simply exposure to highbrow culture, because there's a lot of people let their kids be raised by popular culture, basically, that, whatever's out there on the radio, whatever all the other kids are watching, that's what they get. And they don't get anything else beyond that. And they don't develop the familiarity with it. And this is something we talked about before, where, if you are never exposed to Shakespeare, you'll never get to be able to understand the language and the way language is used in Shakespeare, and it will be unfamiliar to you. or if you never heard classical music, it will be unfamiliar to you. So part of it is to develop the familiarity. But the other thing that I think was a core part of ours was an interest in history, because kids are fascinated with different historical eras and what were the Romans like, and there's all sorts of great stories and things to get them engaged with. What were the Romans like? What were the Greeks like? What were the battles they fought? And I have boys, so it's about battles that they fought. And then that's an entree to say, okay, well, let's read the Iliad. I did that originally with a simplified, more children's version of it, and then we go on to reading the full thing later. That sort of broadens out the horizons and makes them interested in learning more. I find it interesting that somebody thought, well, Walter Scott was a highbrow thing to get kids into, because Walter Scott stories are great. They're, it's knights and battles, and there's lots of stuff to draw someone into that. So yeah, you have to find the excitement and the interest, and carefully select the works that you bring in there to sort of raise it up to the appreciation of the highbrow material. But I maybe this is something that is more works for my kids, but I think it's a fairly universal that, Rupali was talking about the I can't remember what you call it, the history thing where the kids dress up.
Mystery.
At our school, we do the very similar thing at the Montessori school. It's called History Fest. And the kids get incredibly engaged at, picking these characters from out of history and dressing up at them and learning about all the details of their lives. And that's a great way of getting them interested and then drawing them into reading, and encountering the art. So, they discover the Roman Empire. We go off to our nearest art museum, which is in Richmond, and we go. They don't have a very big Greek and Roman wing, but they've got one, and you can see some stuff, and it's enough to sort of start them going on that. So because there are all these great stories out there. There's all sorts of fascinating, interesting events from history that will bring them into that and give them the entree to say, okay, now let's go look at what was created to tell these stories.
I would add that you let the kids drive too. I mean, not literally go put them in the car and let them drive, but but you don't put on them that, oh, you're too young for this or too young for that, because showing Shakespeare to third graders, they're going to get what they can out of it. They're going to stretch themselves to get the deeper understanding of the storyline. But
our boys spent Hamlet keeping a running body count.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be exposed to it. And I like to think of it kind of like how they talk about a foreign language, that you need to that it's easier for a child to learn a foreign language if they've been exposed to it at a young age. So it's just part of their background. So when you expose children to great art, whatever it is, stories, music, drama, painting, sculpture, if it's just something that is in their background of normal activity, they're going to have that basis to launch themselves into whichever level they are drawn to.
And the big thing I learned from Montessori education is model good behavior. Sherri says that to me occasionally, model good behavior.
Yeah, so. And the thing is, I have dear friends who are very much into this idea that you have to hide the bad art or whatever it is. You can't let them be exposed to that. Whatever bad art is in your view is not an actual drug that is going to harm them. It's fine. They're going to make their own, and you have to let them make their own decisions on what is of value to them.
I just want to say that this old man rant of Walter is not limited to art. I remember talking to him on history, and he was telling me about American history. We were discussing something, and he's saying, these kids these days, they don't know anything about history. How can that be? How can they carry on like this? This is all about his classmates. So
Yeah.
anyway,
He's been doing that since he was 8 or 9.
yes.
And yeah, he's a little old man.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Kevin, Les, and Dave. Kevin.
Thank you. A great presentation from panelists. I still focus on a kids and education system. My question regarding, what a public education system can learn from the private one. In private, the kids can practice students centered learning, project-based. They can develop their own constitution, right? How about a public school? Can students participate or drive even design the curriculum textbook? That's a little bit great, in my opinion. And next question, how can an educator battle with outsider, the game makers for the kids? Because the kids' mind, they focus game possible. Let's see, for example, they like explore internet randomly, online gaming, social media. What's your thoughts? Thank you.
I'd like to talk about the public schools a little bit. Public schools are huge and very bureaucratic. And to move that big ship in anything creative takes a lot of effort. Private schools by nature are mostly small and nimble. Even if they are large private schools with 500-600 children, the mode of thinking is that of a startup. And because they don't get funds from anyone, they have to make sure that they are delivering a good product. And so they are more adapt to kind of being nimble and changing to what the children need. Again, I want to stress on value-based education. So there could be private schools, but are not value-based education. So it's no different than a public school, but with some kind of a status to it. And that doesn't help. So private schools don't necessarily mean that they are offering good education. You want to see whether it's public or private, what are the values that those educators are providing, right? The second thing is there are charter schools that have a little more focus than the public schools in general. And so some of the charter schools do a fantastic job of bringing value-based education, project-based learning to schools. In our breakout room, we had a similar question. And what I said, we talked about bootleg romanticism, and public schools will do, project-based learning, or they will call it, this is a project. And unfortunately, those projects are not thoroughly integrated. What Rob was saying in the example before is, if you're learning Shakespeare, this is an example. I think Dave is still here on our call. Dave is our teacher. He's teaching the Indian children to read Shakespeare. And there he was teaching about Midsummer Night's Dream, and they had no clue what the Trojan War was or Troy was. And so Dave just pulls out this map of Greece and tells them the story. So now they're learning geography, history, they're learning, storytelling. Those children look forward to his class at 9 p.m. their time. They don't care about their school lessons because this is so much more engaging, right? So when you have an integrated lesson, when you have an integrated approach, children can see the big picture and then they can learn. What happens in public schools is they'll do a project that's not an interdisciplinary, interconnected project. And so the art teacher is doing a project, the science teacher is doing a project, and then it's done and they don't get the value from it. It's just, it's like the Mr. X who got a glimpse of it and couldn't quite make what it was. You just give it to them and take it away from them. And that's so hard. So it's very difficult to change public schools. I think private schools, small schools are more nimble. And then I'll leave it at that. I couldn't quite understand the second question about social media.
Sure. Next up is
Wait,
Maritza.
yes, if I just wanted to jump in here. I think what he was asking the second part was, what are sources for children outside of like a public school? I think, and I know in our discussion, we touched on this, you know, how children have so much ready to them at their fingertips with the internet. But I would say that, and I will repeat that, I believe that there are some things that you just can't get off the internet. For example, you know, there is this really inexpensive game you get. It's called Story Cubes. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them. It's like dice, but every side, there's 9 dice. Every side has a different picture, and you go around in a circle, and you build a story. When you roll the dice, whatever pictures you get, you got to build a story. Now that is, I've played that game ad nauseum. It's fascinating to watch the steps. I'm going to tell you, little girls who are like between 9 and 11, or maybe 8, they become obsessed with death. They can take a sun and convert it into a story about somebody dying. I have no idea why, but I have found that to be, I have played this game with so many, but the creativity in a simple little game. I mean, I think you can buy these like story cubes for like $5, and they last you forever. Like I've had my set for like 20 years. And you know, my oldest nephew is now 25. So we've been playing this forever and ever. I think things like that, like, so if you don't have the ability or possibility to be in a small private school environment for your children, that's where the human beings that your children interact with, that's where that becomes important. With whom are they interacting? And what are those types of interactions? Because that is something that is within your control. If it's not within your control to say, I have the money to put my child in private school, or I wasn't able to get into one of those free charter schools, well then figure out with whom they're interacting. And are they getting quality type of, you know, interactions? And I mean, so something like that, that I think maybe that was what Kevin was asking, what sources. And I would say it doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to be a lot. Just somebody who has the desire to provide your child with attention and allow them to be creative. It's just that simple.
Wonderful. I have a comment. And then Dave, I'm going to ask you about your experience of teaching Indian kids about Shakespeare. So I'm really, really curious to hear that. But my comment is that the primary responsibility of raising the children is the parents' responsibility. And you have to take the responsibility. And you're kind of hiring a school to help you with that. The primary responsibility still remains yours. So it's you who has to provide the values, the art, and then you can have help of a school or somebody else to provide it. Second thing I want to say is that I'm a big fan of Montessori education. And if you yourself learn a little bit about the Montessori and get the kids started the right way. See, the other important thing is that it's not all equal. It is an exponential curve. If you get them started the right way, that's like 80% of the work. You know, if you can get that initial up to like maybe 6 years or 5 years, whatever, just done perfectly. And that's, so I would focus very heavily on that and draw upon Montessori. If you can send your kid to a Montessori school, nothing like it, but you can also do stuff at home. And once they get that, because what Montessori gives them, and that view, you know, Montessori, Rupali was making a point that Montessori's approach and Ayn Rand's approach about children is the same, because Montessori also regards a child as an independent being who is capable of learning, and the role of the teacher as being the guide to create the environment and be watchful and provide help whenever needed, not directing the child to do things. So that, you know, the prime mover is within the child. And that's the core idea. So if you can make the child an independent learner by the age of 5 or 6, everything else that they will take care of a lot. It can still be, it can still vary, but the base core is all set. All right, Dave. So what's it like? How do you do this? It's like I was, when Rupali told me about this the first time, because I'm familiar with kids from India a little bit. So Dave, how do you do it? How do you get people excited, kids excited about Shakespeare? What's that experience been? Take your time to talk about it. Go ahead.
Maybe I should just explain what it was, how the process happened, because we didn't start with Shakespeare. Instead, Rupali asked me if I could help her nieces, Anwi and Avanti, create scenes for a school class competition. And so we did that, and then we added her nephew Aram to create 1-minute scenes. And we just talked it through, and then we just kept running the scenes and adding more and working the story structure, beginning, middle, end. I was big on, there are 5 acts, not 3. I didn't say not 3, I said there are 5 acts because Shakespeare has 5 acts. And I mentioned to Rupali, okay, are they ready for Shakespeare? And she said, do it. There were 3 of them. So I was trying to figure out, okay, what Shakespeare play has 3 scenes? So I found, the first act of Midsummer Night's Dream, great. And they just took to it. Hey, have a look at this. But then the next week when they looked at it, I thought they were a bit overwhelmed by the language. So I asked, hey, can we use No Fear Shakespeare? I got an okay from Rupali on that. So I just threw them No Fear Shakespeare. And the youngest, Amri, she really absorbed it. And then through No Fear Shakespeare, that I gave them the main text, and everyone else preferred to stay with the main text from there. And they were interested, and I talked about what all the different things mean. I kind of did go, word by word, but more I just let them figure it out on their own if they had any questions. Like, okay, here's where you can find this. Here's where England is. Here's where Greece is. And it's just a back and forth, and having them just constantly running the scenes. Well, firstly, reading the scenes, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? Here's what this means. Here's what this means. Oh, here's what this means. Here's what this is referring to. This is what Cupid is. And show them a picture of Cupid. And it's just context. Context is a huge part of it. But they seem really into it. They love it. I haven't gotten any resistance whatsoever.
Wow.
It was just pure fueled by interest. That's it. Now, I don't know about what the rest of their education system is like.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fine. I just wanted to find out. This is really fascinating. I think most people underestimate kids, and not even like, it's like degree of magnitude. They can do like 10 to 100 times more than what you can think. But if you tell them that you can do only so much, then they will say, oh, it looks like the adult seems to know what I'm doing, and they stick to that. But if you kind of keep it open-ended, they would just, they just, and as you know, so that's a great example. Thank you, Dave. Thanks.
Oh, hold on. I raised my hand because I also had something I wanted to address with Rob and Brendan. Where is he? Oh, there's Brendan. Okay. We talked about this in our breakout room. How, as educators, should we stand against the culture or with the culture? And I'm very 100%, 1,000% on the with. Here's what I mean. Rob, we talked about this earlier. You brought up Star Wars and how, oh, it's all junk. Well, what do you think inspired George Lucas? Right. It was obviously the entire history of film. Japanese film of Kurosawa. What is it? The Western, which is a dead genre now. Eastern philosophy more generally. Then you've got classical music with John Williams and what he was inspired by. And then, of course, you've got Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, who inspired George Lucas.
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, see what I'm talking about. But it's not just Star Wars. I firmly believe that popular culture is based in real things. The guys who made all the money, making all the stuff, it might have been dumbed down, but what initially inspired that product was very real. Let me just give you 2 more examples, then I'll shut up. You probably heard all the kids going on about Pokemon cards. Oh my gosh, it's the stupidest thing, right? It's not. It's absolutely not. The fellow who created Pokemon, I think his name was Satoshi Tajiri, he was seeing in Japan, when he was a kid, the kids had little fight, the beetles were fighting each other. They raised beetles to fight each other. And by the 90s, that was all gone. How do we recreate that? So he built a game that served that purpose. What you can learn with Pokemon, biology, and also the mathematics behind how the games are made and how their combat system works, and the chemistry whereby they decide how the game system works. So wait, what? No, it's just dumb animals doing things. No. There is truth behind all things. There is truth in, yes, low art, because it expresses the human soul too, even if it's merely commercial. And another thing that's very personal to me, you probably, when your kids were really little, listen to the freaking Thomas the Tank Engine thing, right? Oh, that's so stupid. Talking trains. Firstly, trains are the beginning of modernity. Second, that particular story, it's a set of books that were written from the 40s to the 70s. And the guy who wrote them was obsessed with trains, not as symbols, not as like animals. No, they were trains. He was very exact in the stories had to be based in reality. The trains had to look like trains in their the illustrations. And he actually got involved in real rail preservation, which they're all over the UK. And he actually integrated them into his stories. The point I'm trying to make with these examples is don't be afraid of low culture, because it probably, maybe not necessarily, but look into it, do the research, get as engaged as an enthusiast would. I say that because this is what I did. Yeah. And with the internet, it's so easy because generally enthusiasts find each other, they create websites. That was what these past 20 years have been. And you need to know this, because that's how you can be with culture instead of against it, by understanding the foundations are there. Wonderful. And it's just, you might need to pull them out, and you might have to pull out, scrape off a lot of the more commercial stuff that has grown up over the years. But the foundations are more likely than not there. And it's good to look for them. That was my rant.
Wonderful. Go ahead, Rob.
One small thing I want to add to that is there's a book I came across a while back. I didn't buy it because the boys sort of moved on from it, but it was a book that traced all the references in the Harry Potter stories, because there's all these references to classical literature, all these references to history, all these references to, to previous highbrow, to Shakespeare and everything else, and astronomy, and it's all in there. And so, she was a well-educated person and brought in all these things from her own education into the stories. And this person used that basically as a springboard to say, okay, let's talk about where all these different, hippogriffs and where all these different things come from that are being referenced in Harry Potter.
And I'm going to just take 2 seconds to jump back to someone had asked us during, I think, in our breakout room, or maybe before, about this issue of teaching Shakespeare to third graders. We all had just a wonderful little experience of the enthusiasm Dave brings to his teaching. When you see that, who wouldn't be absolutely fascinated with Shakespeare having it presented in that manner? So enthusiasm by the teacher and the guide is a huge important part too. So thank you, Dave.
So one thing I'd like to add to Dave's lessons, I get to watch all these lessons that he does. And the children had no idea of Cupid, because they have similar Indian gods, but they're not exactly the same. And he was like, okay, do you know what she's talking about? That love is blind and there's an arrow. And so they had no idea. So Dave pulls out this art, which is beautiful, romantic art, for them to see an image of Cupid. And now they can understand. The other thing that Dave talked about is emotions, because a lot of expression is through emotions in drama. And have you experienced jealousy? The youngest, who's in 6th grade, immediately got that. And then she was able to play. Within a few minutes of understanding, there was a transformation in the way she presented her dialogue. So I would say, I do see Pokemon and all of the Star Wars references in our school all the time. But and it is popular. We allow for some of that too, because you really can't just shut down, everything that's around them. They are going to be living in this world. So thank you, Dave, for bringing up that point.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quickly. First of all, I don't want to say anything about Star Wars or Pokemon, but I was at the request of someone. I did read some of I have read some of the Harry Potter novels now, and it gave me an appreciation that I didn't previously have for the young adult novel genre. I used to think it was just fluff, and I was just so confused as to why adults were going crazy over so many young adult novels. And the Harry Potter series kind of drilled that home for me, because it's a very, very well written series. Like, I was kind of really lukewarm about the first, but as you get further into them, her writing improves, and it's well written. But what I'm seeing is exactly what Ayn Rand is telling us, that the author is providing us with these characters that are constantly put in situations where they have to rise above these, like, all these things, and they have to be better. And I feel like that's kind of telling, like, there's a void somewhere that's so strong that our adults, our young adults, but young adults technically is for like the teens, but the 20 somethings are these young adults who are so hungry for that type of example, that they're the ones who are propelling this genre into starlight and mass fame. And I didn't understand that before reading the books. Now, I've not seen any of the movies, but I did read some of the books. And one more really quick thing that I want to echo what Shrikant said about underestimating children. I had one little niece who her mother was not my side of the family, was the other side. A different, they were El Salvadorians, so entirely different culture and tradition set. An interesting thing is that her grandmother and mother had no idea when she was 4 that she knew how to tie her shoes and put on her own clothes. They came over to visit me collectively, and they were like floored when she just put on her shoes and tied them. And they were like, why you don't do that at our house? And you know what she said to them? Because you always do it for me. Like, they'd never asked her. I taught her how to tie her shoe, but I didn't think I was the only one teaching her. It just made sense to me. Look, you're too old for me to keep putting your shoes on. Come on, let's figure this out. And we made it a game, and she did, you do the bunny ears. And it just never occurred to me that her family didn't know that she knew how to do it. And it was just that they had never asked her. So it's like, children are, and then, this kid, she found ways to get over on her parents all the time. It's crazy. But, they're so smart, and they're going to rise to whatever level you expect of them. And I have never been one to treat a child as this, like, I don't know, lesser or something. And a lot of people do. And I think that's,
Sorry, I have to tell you a funny story. My niece, so my sister and her husband would talk amongst themselves in Hindi, which is a different language, which they assumed that they had never taught Hindi to this kid. So ever since she was little, they would talk in Hindi whenever they didn't want. And she gave no idea that, and at something like 3 or 4 years later, I asked him, what did they say? And she was able to repeat it very easily. So it's like she had picked up everything, and just like that. Next up is Les, followed by Mike. Les. Les, are you there?
Oh, hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm here now. I found the presentation very interesting today, Rupali especially. I loved that, just seeing the kids, and the sculpture, Sherri, that was really great, emotional. I can understand the pride you felt, and you made the right decision, obviously, to go for a better job, not underestimate your own capabilities. And just one thing I'd like to add here, what I found interesting in this chapter here was how she talks, she talks about art and moral sense of life and how it progresses to morality. And because the wrong schools of morality, the conventional schools, the mystic, the social, and the subjective, which is especially dangerous, and how if the person is exposed to this sort of morality, there's a real danger here that they will be unable to pull themselves out of it. And because of that, they actually end up, they haven't seen it properly, like what they, the proper emphasis on values and philosophy and all that. So they turn into, actually, rather than man the victim, she says they become man the killer. They do it to themselves because they're unable to pull themselves out of this downdraft. They haven't been able to see it. And so they just go along with the conventional ideas and say, no, I don't have to be responsible. I don't have to feel, et cetera, et cetera. And they just let themselves go down. So it can be really dangerous. And I know for, a lot of people, there's a lot of exes out there that are probably experiencing the same situation where their feelings are repressed. I know for myself, it was a long time before I was able to kind of bring my feelings, in line with my reason. My reason actually kind of kept me going because through my career and stuff. But there's an emotional aspect that had always been suppressed a little bit, but it kind of came to a head with an event that came into my life that I finally got married together. But anyway, just another interesting part about this particular chapter is that the original article in the March 1965 edition of the Objectives newsletter, she actually referenced beyond X, she actually referenced Y was another example, who enjoyed ballet music, but he was a nuclear physicist and he repressed it because of the culture and stuff like that. And there was also one more. It was Z. That's all I'll give the person credit to, is Z. And it comes right after this two paragraphs that everyone's mentioned. First, Chakrant, to introduce this chapter, where we talk about the romantic art as the fuel and the spark plug. The very last paragraphs in this chapter. So really, that was not the end of it in her original article back in March 1965. So if you want, I'll just give it to you. I thought it was very interesting. This is the third example that she mentions and how this person pulled themselves out of the situation. She says, in conclusion, let me give you a different kind of case history. It is the story of a man who withstood the tortures of childhood and made his own way to the discovery of moral abstractions. At the age of 7, his ideal was the Lone Ranger. Mine too. That was just myself. I had a little lad. At the age of 9, it was Superman. At the age of 12, it was the Scarlet Pimpernel. Then he asked himself a crucial question. He realized that he had no desire to save French aristocrats from the guillotine and that there were no guillotines around. And he asked himself, how does one apply the things he admired in the Scarlet Pimpernel to one's own life? And how does one practice them in the modern world? He found the answer 2 years later. At the age of 14, he read The Fountainhead. So, and his name, I'll just say, is Zed. Although that's not his real name. Some of you can probably guess who the name is. If anybody's interested, I can let you know, but I don't think he's even honorable enough to receive any sort of acknowledgement. So that's where I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Les. That was great. Thank you. Okay, next up, okay, Rupali, go ahead.
I just wanted to talk about Les's first point about the harmony between reason and emotions. It's so important that they are in harmony, and many children don't have that. So one of the ways that you can easily do it is, talk about emotions, talk about what the child is feeling, and not in a superfluous way, but when they accomplish something. For example, when the children finish their art class and we walk out, and it's the same calm feeling that we had when Sherri just talked about the statue, and you're so involved in it, and the children come out saying, I feel very satisfied, or I feel calm, I feel relaxed. And it's important to give that language to children so that they can learn to express how they feel and articulate what they think. When they don't have that language, then they are violent, then they are anxious, then they are depressed, because there's no way that they can express themselves. They can think about it, there's something going on in their head, but there's no outlet. And we see this more often in the middle school age students who haven't had that experience of expressing themselves, and then later in adulthood too. So having that reason and emotions in harmony is a key thing in education.
Excellent point. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike. Mike, I'll give you 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and be even briefer than that. Rupali described some things that went on in charter schools and how things were a little easier in charter schools. There's something that came out of Bell Labs that applies to both charter schools and the public school system. And that's something called the Hawthorne effect. If you and they tried to determine how to make telephones efficiently and quality at a place called the Hawthorne Works, which was in suburban Chicago. And they tried different industrial engineering efficiency type things, like set up soft lighting and see if that improved. Set up music, set up comfortable seating, set up different kinds of both psychological and physical things. And everything they tried with their pilot groups improved production. And the brilliance out of that is a pilot group itself shows that you're interested in the workers and the students, and that improved the process. Now, the charter schools have that kind of built in, that you're going to an exclusive school, even though it may be in a storefront or in an old warehouse, and use retool teachers that aren't as certified as real teachers, but they have had amazing results. Now, the Office of Juvenile Justice, the Justice Department, had set up what they call a mentoring program in about 3 years ago, to where they got both volunteers and paid administrators and paid people to go in and mentor high-risk kids, and that has shown good results. And this mentoring program is hopefully is going to continue. And one of their one of their concepts is, with these high-risk kids, it takes 12 years to take a kid and get him ready to go to prison, him or her ready to go to prison, or it takes 12 years to get that kid to become a dropout, not to be a dropout, and to be ready to go to college and a contributing member of society. So that mentoring program is using art classes and various other devices is what I think we've been talking about here. And I'll
Thank you.
yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mike. All right. So any concluding thoughts from any of the panelists? Rupali, go ahead.
So I just want to say, yes, we can have all kinds of soft lighting and comfortable seating and all of that. And without having a rich curriculum, children are not going to learn. I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about why public schools could not open and could not serve the children here. This is a country that has probably the maximum resources that can offer to children. In India, I know of students, I know of children who do not have internet access, and the parent, as Shrikant correctly said before, it's the parent's responsibility to educate their children. We have someone I know personally who would drive out 7 miles onto the highway with their child because that's where they would get the Wi-Fi signal to log in. And the teachers made the effort to get those classes online and not let the children waste this year. And this father would drive every day 7 miles. They would sit under the tree by the side of the highway and they would log in and attend classes. So yes, you can have all kinds of luxurious environments, but if you don't have that drive, it really doesn't help. And it is the job of the adults to provide for that environment for learning, not just for their comfort.
Wonderful. So I have to say, Rupali, today's, thank you for being a guest panelist today. I think it was just fantastic because you were able to kind of show what art does, and you can see that in kids, and with all your slides of the pictures of the kids and how you actually employ it, just brilliant. And Sherri, that was very special. Looking at the statues. So this was a great presentation, and thank you, folks. And we will see you next week. Joya, do you know what the next chapter is?
Yes, next week we are going to be talking about Victor Hugo because Ayn Rand wrote an introduction to a translation of Victor Hugo's novel 93. So that is what's on deck next. Did Rob have something he wanted to say?
Well, and I want to reiterate, if people haven't done it already, your assignment for tomorrow,
next week,
for next week, is if you're not familiar with Hugo and you want to do it in a very simple way, go find, I think you recommended that 10th anniversary concert performance. You can find it on YouTube. 10th anniversary concert of Les Miserables, the musical. It'll give you a very, very good flavor for Victor Hugo for those who aren't familiar.
For those of you who aren't the musical types, there is it BBC? I think BBC does a very good 6-part series on Les Mis, which is phenomenal. It's very, very close to the book.
Okay, good.
Wonderful. All right, folks. So see you next time.